Let's set the scene. One man, a regular workshop in Miami, and a wrecked Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, one of only 60 ever made. The front end is destroyed. The part situation is non-existent. And Bugatti themselves have gone on record saying this car should not be rebuilt anywhere outside their own factory. Mate Rimac, the man who literally owns a brand now, personally weighed in, not through a press release, not through a spokesperson. The CEO himself, publicly stating this rebuild should not happen. That's the backdrop. And that's what makes everything that follows so impossible to look away from. By the end of part one, the drama had already spiraled well beyond what anyone expected. Matt had found damage near the gearbox and engine mounting area that stopped the whole team dead. The kind of damage where you stand there staring at it, hoping it somehow looks better the longer you look. It doesn't. It never does. And that is exactly where we pick things up, because from this point forward, the Bugatti controversy starts to fade into the background and the real question takes over. Can Matt actually do this? Not as a publicity stunt. Not to win an argument on the internet. Can he genuinely fix a $2 million hypercar in a normal garage? Episode 3 dropped on February 8th, 2026 and hit 12 million views almost immediately, which tells you everything you need to know about how desperately people wanted an answer to that question. Mate Rimac had been very specific. Properly separating a Chiron required specialized equipment, specialist training, and a controlled environment. Those were his exact words. Matt's response was to dedicate an entire episode to doing precisely that in what is very clearly not a controlled environment. And he leaned into the point hard, framing his workshop as, in his own words, the third place in the world now capable of doing what Bugatti claimed only 2 places could. To be fair to Matt, he didn't have a choice. The damage at the rear of the car was far too serious to work around. What at first appeared to be a nasty crack near the gearbox had quietly become the single biggest question mark hanging over the entire project. The only way to get a proper look at it was to pull the engine on a Bugatti Chiron. And pulling the engine on a Bugatti Chiron means separating the entire rear drivetrain section from the front carbon tub. That's the kind of sentence that should, by all rights, end a YouTube rebuild series. Matt treated it like a Tuesday. He, his dad, Alex, and the rest of the team just started taking the car apart. Rear quarter panels came off. Door seals removed. Hidden bolts discovered behind trim panels nobody had mapped before. The rear hatch came off easier than expected, which Matt seemed almost personally offended by. Then the wing. Then the bumper, which came away as one enormous assembly. Airbox out. Wiring looms trace labeled and carefully disconnected. Hydraulic lines were removed and set aside with extra caution, partly because nobody was entirely sure what fluid was in them, and partly because nobody knew how difficult it would be to source more later. The whole process sat somewhere between a precision teardown and an archaeological dig. What stands out watching that episode is how often Matt sounds genuinely surprised that the car isn't harder to take apart. Not because the Chiron isn't an impressive machine. It obviously is. But because once you understand the logic behind how it was assembled, the mystery starts to dissolve. What the team had expected might consume an entire week was finished in a couple of days. And given everything Bugatti had said publicly, that was not a small thing to prove. Matt never once argues a Chiron is simple. His point is quieter than that. Somebody built this car, which means somebody else can take it apart. And then comes a moment that defines the entire episode. After the wiring, the coolant lines, the hydraulic lines, the prop shaft, the fuel lines, and the 14 fasteners holding both halves of the car together are dealt with, the Bugatti splits in 2. Front carbon tub and rear drivetrain section fully separated. The front end sitting on what can only be described as a set of bin wheels, looking completely unhinged, absurd, like something you'd see in a fever dream about car repair. It also worked perfectly. The thing Bugatti said could not be done in a regular garage had just been done in a regular garage, with the front half of a Chiron Pur Sport resting on wheels that had absolutely no business being anywhere near a $2 million car. That moment shifted the entire conversation. Before it, plenty of people were still treating this rebuild as a stunt that would inevitably hit a wall it couldn't climb. After it, Even the viewers who agreed with Bugatti on the safety arguments had to admit that Matt had just cleared something genuinely significant. But splitting the car was never the point. It was only ever the means to see what was actually hiding underneath. And on a crashed Bugatti, what's hiding underneath is rarely good news. The crash had driven the engine forward hard enough to crush a coolant pipe and leave marks in places you really do not want to see marks on a $2 million car. But the thing that worried everyone most was a cast aluminum engine and gearbox mounting support. Not a trim piece, not a cosmetic bracket, a structural component carrying serious mechanical load. And it had broken clean through on both sides. For a long moment, the project seemed to teeter on the edge of something unrecoverable. Then came the good news, and genuinely, nobody saw it coming. The damage appeared to be contained entirely within that mounting support, rather than reaching deeper into the engine block itself. If the block had absorbed the full force of the impact directly, this series would have ended right there, quietly and sadly. But because the broken component appeared to be its own separate piece, bolted on rather than cast as part of the block, it opened up the possibility of repair, replacement, or redesign. The story shifted from potentially having a destroyed Bugatti engine, the kind of problem that makes accountants physically unwell, to having one very serious broken part with no factory replacement available. Because Bugatti still was not selling them a single thing. That left two paths. The first was to machine an entirely new mount from a solid billet of aluminium, stronger than the original, cleaner, built from scratch. Exactly the kind of solution that generates clicks and comment section excitement. The problem was precision. That mount contains exact locating points for crank position sensors, and on a Bugatti, close enough and correct are two completely different things. If those sensor positions ended up even fractionally off, the engine could run rough, refuse to start, or behave dangerously under load. The second option was to repair the original casting, preserve the factory geometry exactly as Bugatti designed it, eliminate the machining risk entirely, and do it for less money. The catch was a real one. Nobody actually knew whether cast aluminium of that type was weldable. If it wasn't, the option evaporated on the spot, and the problem got significantly harder. So Matt takes the part to Bob at the machine shop. And this is quietly one of the best moments in the entire series, because for once, the answer isn't treated as a foregone conclusion. Bob inspects the material, lines everything up, and confirms that yes, it can be welded. There's a beat where you can feel the relief come through the screen, like finding out you somehow passed an exam you were absolutely certain you failed. Bob welds apart. Matt reinforces the weak areas. His reasoning is straightforward. If the repair is done properly and the part comes back stronger than stock, it should not fail the same way again. But then he raises something easy to overlook and hard to ignore. Strengthening that mount might actually create a new problem, because Bugatti may have engineered it to be the weak point deliberately, designed to absorb crash energy, designed to break before the damage reaches somewhere worse, somewhere more expensive, somewhere more dangerous. Matt doesn't dismiss the idea. He just acknowledges that without any factory support, without any engineering data, he is the one deciding what level of risk is acceptable. And that is a surprisingly honest thing to say out loud when 12 million people are watching. Once the repaired mount goes back on, things start moving at a pace that feels almost surreal given how completely stuck everything had been just days before. Components return to their positions. Matt pauses long enough to point out that the starter motor on this $3 million Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, one of 60 in existence, shares a part number with a Volkswagen 1.9 TDI, the same starter motor, just living at a considerably more prestigious address. The front and rear halves of the car come back together. While the rear section is still accessible, Matt and Alex fit a custom Valvetronic exhaust setup that looks genuinely beautiful against exposed engineering. And then, while torquing down the 14 fasteners joining both halves of the chassis, Matt snaps a bolt. He'd used the wrong torque figure on one of the differently sized fasteners tucked underneath, the kind that's easy to miss when you're reassembling something no one outside motion was ever supposed to reassemble. The car is literally in the process of becoming whole again and still finds a way to cause chaos. He shows a mistake on camera, extracts the broken piece, orders a replacement, and keeps going. No panic, no drama, just the quiet discipline of someone who knows that mistakes happen and that hiding them helps nobody. And then comes a moment the entire audience had been holding its breath for since episode 1. Everything reconnected. Everything tightened down. Matt turns a key and the Bugatti starts. First attempt. On a car that had been split completely in two. A car whose engine mount had been welded back together in a local machine shop. A car that had been fully disassembled and rebuilt by a team that Bugatti publicly declared should not be touching it. The engine fires and the workshop fills with that unmistakable sound. And for just a few seconds, everything that had been said about why this couldn't work goes very, very quiet. About 3 seconds into the celebration, fuel begins leaking from underneath the car. A fuel line had simply popped loose during reassembly. They fix it. They restart the engine. And then they get one more answer they have been quietly hoping for, but never quite willing to say out loud. The car selects a gear. It goes into drive. And that matters far more than it might sound, because a significant number of people watching had genuine doubts this project would ever produce a functioning drivetrain. Now here it was, running, selecting gears. And the entire conversation around the rebuild started shifting in a direction that was harder and harder to argue with. But the rebuild is nowhere near finished. The cooling system still needs proper attention, and Matt has been upfront about the fact that they cannot fully evaluate the engine until the front radiators are repaired and coolant is actually flowing through the system. That matters because Alex had driven the car without coolant at one point. The kind of detail that makes any mechanic visibly uncomfortable and any engineer close their eyes. If that run damaged water pump seals, warped internal surfaces, or compromised anything else in the cooling circuit, the car will not reveal it while idling happily in a warm workshop. It will wait. It will reveal it later at speed at the worst possible moment. Beyond that, the front of the car still carries unresolved structural and body damage from the original crash. And past even that, there's the broader and more difficult question of whether this Bugatti can actually live like a Bugatti again. Starting once in a workshop is one thing. Proving the repaired systems hold under sustained load, that the sensor positions are accurate, that the gearbox pressures behave correctly, that nothing unexpected surfaces once the engine reaches full operating temperature and stays there, that is a completely different challenge. The original drama was about whether Matt had the nerve to take on Bugatti at all. That argument has mostly run its course. What remains now is less dramatic, but far more important. Heat, coolant, pressure, seals. The slow, unglamorous, unforgiving work of proving this is a real car again, and not simply a workshop project that happens to start and select a gear. If Matt gets through all of that, this becomes one of the most remarkable independent hypercar repairs anyone has ever attempted. And the people who said it would inevitably end up back at the Bugatti factory, shipped home with its tail between its legs, they might finally have to let that go.